Hello and welcome everyone to our NPM Skills 101 monthly webcast series. My name is Eric Desmond from the Global Customer Success Team. I will be your moderator. Today's presenters are Ian Lindsay, Anna Malik and Gerard Lott. The material covered today will include best practices in Change Auditor for your on-prem and Azure reporting, alerting and protecting. This session will be recorded and we'll be sending everyone on the registration list a link to the recording within 72 hours for future use. Feel free to ask your questions through the chat so they can be addressed by Anna and Gerald from the Quest team. Please note, if you choose to put a question in the chat, your first and last name will appear. We're mentioning this so you're aware for basic privacy reasons. With that, I'll hand the webcast over to Ian Lindsay.
Thank you, Eric. Great to see so many people excited to learn a little bit more about Change Auditor this morning. So let me just start off with a couple of quick introductions to everybody here. My name is Ian Lindsay. I am currently a solutions architect with Quest. I've been a software developer, a consultant, a trainer. I worked for Microsoft for a whole number of years. I'm actually based in Pittsburgh, so you can see there I'm a Steelers, Penguins, and Pitt fan, although in football I think I'm going to be rooting for my old hometown team, the Eagles, as we go. Joining me, we first have Anna. Go ahead, Anna.
Good morning, everyone. I am a Quest baby here. I just started less than a year ago. However, I have been working on a customer side, and I have used Quest Change Auditor for many years, and it's a wonderful tool. Thank you.
And a lot of the examples that we're going to run through are some that Anna used to use as a customer as well. So they're very practical. Gerald.
Hello, and my name is Gerald Lott. So I'm still considered a newbie because I've been here for just a little bit over a year. Actually, it's been a year and a week since I've started with Quest. But I've been in, the field for about 35 years. Shows how old I am, and I love fast cars. I have one of my biggest hobbies is my aquarium and this job.
Okay, a job is a hobby. Got it. Love that. Okay, so what we had set up for today was to look at, we're going to look primarily on the Active Directory and Azure Active Directory side. What are some of the alerts that you might want to look at for some critical activity that happens? Reporting. How, what, when, where, why are we going to do some reporting? And we'll look quickly at object protection within Active Directory. There's a new feature that was introduced, I think not in the current point release, but the last point release, around better controlling GPOs as an attack vector. So we'll look at each of these. So we'll start off on the alerting side and look at some of the different pieces that we're going to want to monitor. Now, when you're alerting, primary way that most people do alerting is via email. You can also do SNMP traps, WMI events as well. But before you can do an email, you have to set up your email server within Change Auditor. So to do that, we're going to open up the administration tab. So if you go to the View menu, Admin tab, that will open up the screen that we see here. And select the coordinator. This is a setting for the coordinator service itself. So the first thing that we're going to define is our SMTP server. Now, what you're seeing on here is how I would set this up if I were running my email in Exchange Online 0365. So we set it up as smtp.office365.com is the server, the mail server that you're going to go to. You do need an account to log in to O365 to get this to work, and that account does need an email license as well. So when you're entering that information, make sure that your account has the proper email licensing for it to work. So this is for the alerting side of it. This also applies to the reporting side as well if I'm going to email my reports. But what you might also do with the email reports is dump them to a file system. So we also have the ability within the coordinator settings to define a default place where our reports will be sent. So we're going to need an account that has the rights to write to that share. So we'll provide our AD account and domain, and then the share and any folder structure underneath that we would potentially need for that location for where all these reports are going to write. So this is the initial setup that you're going to do. If it's an on-premise SMTP server, you would use your appropriate settings to do that as well. So let's go on to the next. Let's just start to look at some of the alerts. So one, when you're thinking about alerting, there's a lot of things you're going to want to alert on potentially. The obvious stuff is, changes to critical groups. Everybody kind of knows that, hey, somebody added somebody to the domain admins or the schema operators or some other account with a lot of control in it. But there's some other ones. Now, this is a good one. This came from Anna's old company as well. What if somebody is trying to set the password that they don't have to change it anymore? In certain companies, there are execs or doctors who hate to have to set a password and reset it, and they never want to set it. So if somebody goes in and does that setting on a user account, we're going to want to know about it. So there's really two areas in the structure when we're on the searches tab where we can create things. Private, this is the area where you're going to build stuff, test it, make sure it all works. We're going to show building all these in the private area first. Once you get them working, move them out somewhere into the shared option. Figure out a folder structure that works for you guys for how you want to store them so that everybody would have access to them. But I'm going to go in the private area, and I'm going to right click on there and tell it to create a new search, and that will give me the tabs that I see down the bottom. So in the info tab, that's obviously where you're going to give it a name. In this case here, password never expires, checked, that somebody turned it on. You can give it an optional description. This note here, this little checkbox, if this is a tab that you want to have open all of the time, you can make the tab auto refresh by checking the refresh interval here. That's the way your overview tabs. The query that runs behind that is set for an auto refresh interval of every 5 minutes to show you the latest events that happen. So we start by giving our query a name. Then I'm going to go to the What tab. So within the What tab, you see there's an add button and it's got that little drop down behind it. When you just click on add, it's going to go to look for AD objects. So I need to do something a little different. So I'm going to click on that little arrow next to add, and that's going to allow me to bring up this menu here where I can choose event class, and that will give me this window now. So the password never expires option is a custom monitoring option. So you see here under facility, custom user monitoring. So you're going to want to find this. The easiest way to find this in the list is just start typing inside of the gray box that you see right under event class, type user password, and it will drill down and filter down, and you'll be able to find this particular option under the custom user monitoring where we can pick the password never expires. Now, you don't necessarily always want this to fire. I don't want to know that somebody turned this option off per se. So I can build in restrictions here. Now, the restrictions that we put on are, I only care when the value was changed from disabled to enabled, meaning that somebody has just been set to not have to change a password anymore. So we add those particular restrictions in here, and then I can click on the add button so it shows up down in my lower list. And I will click on the OK button to add that to my event list. Now, do you want this to run everywhere in your environment, or do you want it to run in a specific location? If we go in, same way, I click on the add button, but this time I'll pick Active Directory. I'm going to go in and we will say select a specific object. So in this case, an OU where my user accounts exist. So if you had users under a specific organizational unit or multiple organizational units, I can select them. I click on my add button again to bring them down into the list of places that I want this to actually look for, and then go ahead and click OK. And now you can see underneath is what I have two things that I'm looking at now. I'm looking for that option changed, that the password never expires, but I'm only looking for it in a specific location. I'm not looking for it everywhere. So I can narrow my scope down in what I'm doing here. And this will give me, now the next thing I'll need to do is turn on the alert. So you can see here we have the options for SNMP traps, WMI events, and SMTP on the alert tab. So we're going to check the SMTP option. You can click on configure email, and the big thing you'll want to do here is make sure that it's going to somebody. So we've got the variables down here, who, user, added user is going to be whom, added managers is the manager variable. These are variables that Change Auditor creates automatically that you can use. But when you're sending alerts, best practice, send them to a distribution list. Don't send them to an individual person. If that person leaves the company or is sick or on leave for a while, who's going to get those alerts now because that person's not getting them? So we will go ahead and set them up. You can even configure the body of the email that gets generated if you want to do something different. It's a little different from the norm as well. And you can add in additional values that we collect as part of the event into those emails if you configure the whole body. The last check is to turn on the alert. So I've set it all up down here. I need to make sure it's actually enabled, and then I can go ahead and click save and save this all. So now and you'll see under the alert tab, you'll see that it's enabled, and under the alert 2, you'll see who it's actually going to in here as well. So that would create the first one for us. The next one's a little interesting, and we're going to use a special feature within Change Auditor to go in and control how we do the alert based off of what we're seeing in the activity. So group members. Do you want to know every time somebody is added or removed from a group? Probably not. Do you want to know if there's some mass deleting going on in here? And in this case, we're building the example out for 100 users deleted in a minute. This could potentially be a sign of hacking. It could be a sign of somebody doing something wrong, not realizing what they're doing. And you'll want to be alerted about it so we can go ahead and maybe take some corrective action against it. So same thing, after we've given it a name, we go to the What tab, and we're going to click on the Add an Event class again. This time, the event that we're looking for is Group Member Removed. And there's, as you can see here, we've got the Azure Active Directory group members removed. There is a corresponding on-premise group member removed as well. So you have both of those. So we have that option, group member removed. And again, type in your event class. You can just type in that gray box, group member, and it will narrow the list down to you. Click on add, and when you click on add in here, it's going to prompt you and say, do you want just this one event, or do you want that whole facility as well? And you can add them, add multiple at once. But we just want to know about the group members removed here. So we're selecting that, clicking add, clicking OK to add it to the list. Now, one way to limit how this is happening, think, group members added. Okay, I've got 100 admins all over. They've all removed one person from a group. It just happens to be at the same time. Is that something I really want to know about? So we want to narrow this down, and there's two ways to do it. One way is this. We're going to click on the Add button again, and we're going to choose the Active Directory. We switch to this object, and we're going to go to our Search button so that we can find a specific group that we're interested in. So I'm narrowing it down one way in the What tab to a specific group that I care about. And in this case here, it was a test group. So we can beginning to type in the name in here and hit enter, or click on the search button to find it, select and hit the add button to bring it down, and click OK. So in here, you can see now I have the group's member being removed and the specific group that I'm looking at. The other way we can do this, I'll show you this in just a second, is on the Alert tab. So I click on the Alert tab, And you see we've already, turned on SMTP and enabled the alert. But what we're going to want to do is look at the smart alert option. So when we get 100 events, I don't care about that. But I do care when those 100 events happen within 1 minute. So that something happened rapidly, it's scripted, or a hacker is doing something and I want to know that. Now, the one way that we limit it was back in the What tab by looking at a specific group. The other option that you have is this bottom checkbox, and you could say on a single object. This will allow this to run across for all of my groups. So, I have 100 groups that one user gets removed out of each one. That's not going to fire the alert. If I check, that would fire the alert in this example. If I check this checkbox, that won't fire the alert because that 100 users removed has to happen on one specific group by using this particular option in here on a single user. So you have those two ways that you can go ahead and limit your scope of your alert so it's not firing too much on you. So this is the second way. So we set it to 100 and set our time frame. Click OK. So now we have it. You can see we're looking for that specific action. Group removed. And again, remember this was looking on a specific group for that happening. Another common item. Did somebody add or remove a domain controller? Doesn't seem that, it's not something that's going to happen a lot. One of the reasons you might want to look at this is, and I think this, Anna, this was your reason as to why this was happening, was one of the settings you can do in change order is to automatically deploy the agents onto new machines, and you can limit that down to things like the domain controllers. Not every company does that. Go ahead, Anna.
That's correct. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that the change auditor agent is deployed on all domain controllers, so we are not missing the events in the change auditor when something had happened and the changes went through that one domain controller that I didn't know that was pushed out, and all of a sudden we missing part of the events.
Yep. And then this is common in a lot of companies where they don't want stuff auto pushed to things like domain controllers. So we need to know that new domain controller was added. So again, after we've named the new query, we go to the What tab. Again, we're going to use the little down arrow to select event class. And in this case, there you see here for the domain configuration, there is a specific class called a domain controller added to the domain. So the domain add, that's going to give us what I want, but there's a couple other ones that you might want as well. The domain controller added or removed. So maybe you want to know a domain controller went away. Why did a domain controller go away? So we have those two events. Did somebody rename a domain controller? Not always a good thing happening in your environment if somebody renames it. And then the functional level. Did somebody go in and maybe update the domain functional level? There's actually a forest functional level you could add here as well. That sometimes that could cause issues, and people don't want to do that unless specific testing is going on. So these are probably the 4 events that we're going to be most interested in. And I'll click OK and add them in here. And then again, the next thing you do is turn on the alert inside of the alert tabs. But that's the pieces that I'm looking for there. Now, as we're moving to the cloud, more and more companies are in a hybrid environment where they've got some stuff in Azure, they've got some stuff on-prem. One of the groups or roles that you get inside of Azure is, and depends on how you look at it, in the interface, it's called Global Administrator, but if you look in the audit logs and other places, it's called Company Administrator. That is your all-powerful administrator role inside of the cloud. So same way that I want to know about those changes to my groups on-prem, this one role, and there's probably a couple other roles that you might want to look at as well, is one I'm going to want to know if somebody got changed and added into this particular role as well. So again, I create the new search, give it my name, and I go to the What tab. I'm going to click on that little down arrow button again next to add so that I can go to, in this case here, I'm looking for a cloud event. Now this does require that you have set up Change Auditor to pull these events from the cloud down into the Azure Active Directory, which we haven't really gone over in this event. But that is part of your Change Auditor for Active Directory license, is the ability to grab the Azure AD event log, pull it down, and also the sign-ins log and pull it down as well. So I'm going to go and specifically select an Azure Active Directory item. So, and this is where it gets fun, and Anna had to do a lot of fun testing to figure this one out, and the note's going to pop up in here as well. So we're going to go through some kind of specific events here, and you see it's a little bit more of a fun interface for picking out. So the activity name is, and here we're using the comparator like, add member to role. So you may or may not know what this is. So I'm going to do, after I click on selected events, type in the like, and we're looking for these 4 down here that we see. If you are not sure what this is, and this note's going to pop up in a second, create the event, wait for it until you see it in Change Auditor, and then use the info inside the event to find it. So the activity, we're looking for a person being added to a role. And in this case, the role or target that we're looking for is company administrator. And note that we put an asterisk at the end here to be able to find that just in case there's any extra text or Microsoft changes the name down the line. So we're looking for member added to role in company administrator, removed from the role company administrator, or put in and added as eligible. Remember, that's one of the things you can do, is you don't have to put somebody in, but you can make them eligible for the role. And then there's the whole PIM system behind the fact that will add people into it as well. So we can make people eligible for the role as well. And if we're doing that, we can do that, find that here. So we create each one of those and click add. Click on OK. And again, if you don't know what the exact text is, create the event. You can go ahead in and find it. So this will give me people that are being added and removed or made eligible for the company administrator or the enterprise admin's role. And then you can add your other groups in there as well. Now this was another fun one that we had spent some time kind of figuring out. When you get into Azure, and your users are given things like team sites and SharePoint sites, they may or may not have the ability to add a new user to the site or add people. Well, they'll probably definitely have the ability to invite people into team meetings. They may also have the ability to invite people into SharePoint sites. That action creates a new cloud user in your Azure Active Directory. So this is going, and you could be surprised. We worked with one of the Big Four accounting firms who didn't realize this. They did all their work through Teams meetings. They went in and they found that they had millions of cloud accounts in their tenant because of all of the team meetings in here. So.
Hey, Ian, just to interrupt you 1 second, there is a good question that I thought maybe everybody would want to hear. So for the service account that will be used to query Azure AD, is global role enough?
You don't actually need a service account. This is interesting. What you're going to do in the setup inside, you go into the administration tab and you're going to click on the auditing tab, and under directories, you're going to pick the Azure Active Directory. What we do is we create an application inside of the tenant. So the user who does the setup needs to be a global administrator at the time they're doing the setup to be able to create the application. The application will then give the rights to read the logs, to pull them down in, and you will pick an agent in your environment you're going to want to be the one that is actually pulling the events down, passing them to the coordinator to be put inside of the database. So yeah, that's a very good question in there.
Yeah,
but
and then the And
Yeah,
the
go
other
ahead.
part of this setup is, I was going to say, it's probably the best choice of a machine where you want to put the agent to collect the Azure logs would be your AAD Connect server, that you already have a connection between your, from your firewall side between your on-prem and Azure.
Yes, that is correct. That is also a very good best practice that we tell everybody. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit more. In this case, we're looking at the who. So this one's a little bit more fun. So rather than adding somebody in here, we're actually excluding something here on the who. So when we click on add, we're going out and we are finding the Azure AD Connect, the sync server, AD sync server. And that's what you're seeing here, sync _ our server is called AZ80Con, Azure AD connection. It gets created. So there is an account that gets created behind the scenes, and we're going to want to exclude that account. So we go out, we search for it, we find it, we're going to search by putting it in the name, we're going to add, and then we're going to check the exclude this particular one. I don't care about users that are being created by the sync service. Those are my hybrid users. So I'm going to specifically exclude them from this. Next, what I'm going to have to do is potentially exclude those guest accounts that get created. So on the What tab, we're going to go to the Azure AD. And in this case here, the same thing with the selected events. We're looking at a user add is the activity that is happening. We are looking for them not having specifically an @ sign in it, and that they were created as a cloud-only account. So here, the activity, user added. If it has the @ sign in it, that's those other accounts that we were talking about where we're inviting in our partners, customers into SharePoint sites and team sites. So this is how we're going to go ahead and exclude them and only find my cloud-only users that were added directly to my tenant. So I'll click on add to add this one in and click OK. So now I have that who for my exclusion for my sync service. I have the what to exclude my guest users from other domains, and now I'm only looking for a specific user that was created directly in my tenant as a cloud-only account and not one of my hybrid accounts. So those are some examples of some things that you may want to add in. They're probably a little bit out of the norm for alerts. Obviously, there's a ton of other things that you may want to look at for alerts as well that probably way out of scope of what we're talking about for this class. So let's look at reporting. A lot of these alerts, sometimes you may want a report, or you're going to get asked to generate for auditors information. So, what is a report? Everything in Change Auditor starts with those searches. So we were building searches in that last section specifically for alerts. You build out searches specifically for reports as well. Think of a report as something that I'm going to run, and I'm going to print it, or I'm going to save it to disk, or I'm going to email it to somebody. This is my paper-based version of it. So there's really 3 things to do to build a report. So I'm going to show you how to build reports. So there's a layout, there is the data that I want on the report, and then there is how I want it to run. So let's look at each of those. So in administration tasks, again, go to your view, open administration task, in the configuration, you'll see there's this, under the configuration, there's this thing called report layouts. There is one report layout in, it's called default. That's the one that I have open. So I selected default and I hit edit. So this is kind of your hint here. If all of it, by default, this is what it looks like. It's, the report name, the data that we've pulled out, and a logo, and it's the Quest logo that we put onto all the reports. So here's the hint. To globally change all of your reports to have your logo on it, take this default, modify it, take our logo off, put your logo on, and default is what every report will use by default for its formatting. Now all of your reports have your logo instead of ours. You can create additional report designs in here if you want, or just change the default. If you add additional ones, you're going to need to manually pick them when we're going in and creating the report. So when we're building out the search, there's two tabs that we're going to deal with here. The layout tab is the first one. So the layout tab is defining the data that's going to be on two things here. One, the grid view. When you run a query and it pops up a new tab and you've got that list of events, selected columns that you see here, the second option is what that data is. If you want to, and this also defines for the report as well, what the data is going to be on the report, because the report is the print version of that grid view. So if the field isn't already in the grid view that you need, you might need to add it. In the layout tab on selected columns, this is every single field that we grab when we're grabbing events. Some of these will be blank because they don't apply to the particular event you're doing. Some of them will have the additional information. You can search in here. One thing that is, this is a hint for everybody as well, if you don't know the column that you are looking for, what you can do is, instead of just adding them over, so right now, if I go back one here, you see I have severity selected. If I scroll to the bottom of this list, when you add a new record from unselected and tell it to add it, it adds it right after whatever is selected. So if I find the last object in here and I select every data column and add it into the end of my report, run the query, I can then look in that grid view. It's going to be a big scroll, but I can look at the values and see, oh, that's the one that I need. Then I can come in here and just select that particular value. So I'll find the fields that I need, and I'm going to add them to selected columns. This is also the order that they show up in the field, in the grid view. So if you need to move them around, you've got your buttons to move them up and down and get in the ones. Now, we may have some things in here that you don't care about in the report that we put into a search by default. You remove those columns. Select the column, click on the remove button, move it back to the unselected. But this will give me the ability to define my grid, what I want it to look like, and the data values that I need in my report here, and the order that I want them to show up in. The next thing you want to do is grouping and sorting. So you may need to sort by multiple fields, and that's what I brought in here. So I wanted to sort by the time that I found something as well as the subsystem. And actually this, I think I got backwards. I want this to be group up the subsystems together so I can see all of the changes grouped together, and then sort them by time as well. And we can sort ascending or descending, whatever is the appropriate value in here. The other thing that you see here is this group by. You can turn this on and off to group it up. So this is going to group up changes that have happened for each subsystem, and then I'll sort them by the time that they applied. For the visuals, this doesn't apply to the report. When you run the search, if you are grouping on one value, and only one, you can tell it to show it to you in a graph instead of the grid. I could tell it to show me in a pie chart or bar graph. But again, the restriction is only one thing can be grouped on. So this defines the data that I want in the report. Now I need to go to the report tab here and define when and how do I want this report to happen. So you see the same way that alert, there's an enable report button. We modify just the default layout to change the logo. If you had created an additional layout, this is where you would select it after we've enabled it. Then we're going to define how it runs. So our options are daily or weekly or monthly. And when I change the report from weekly to monthly, the radio buttons down the bottom change. So on my monthly, and this one I've set up the first day of the month, last day of the month, or you could pick a specific day of the month. And say monthly, let's say you wanted a quarterly report, I would choose monthly and tell it to run every 3 months. Here, that will give me a quarterly report. Then you're going to tell it what time you want it to run and in what time zone. So I want this to run at 3 in the morning, Arizona time zone is where this is going to run. So that will get my report to actually go ahead and run. Now, where am I going to send it? So remember earlier, we talked about we can configure this to go to a mailbox, send it through an email, or we can send it to a share. So again, if I switch from mailbox to share, this will change my list down the bottom and prompt me for the share that I'm going to write to as well. When I send an email, again, your best practice is going to be send a report to a DL, not an individual user. A couple of options that are a little interesting. If this query ran and nothing happened, let's say, this was my report that's going to go to the auditors every month on changes to the domain admins group and no changes were made. If it's it's going to be an empty report, I could say, don't bother, don't send them an empty report as well. Or I can tell it to actually send the empty report if I want as well. The other option then is, what is the format that I'm going to send it in? Default is it's going to be an HTML file, but we can send it in a PDF, we can send it in a Word, text, Excel, or comma-separated data. Some people use this as a way to get quote-unquote raw data out of the system and into data files. You would use the comma-separated CSV option. That will give you basically a data file to get that out of Change Auditor that you could use in other places as well. So I have those, and then I can, do I fit to page, or do I just, fit to the width of the file when I'm laying it out? So those are my options for how is it going to want, what format's it going to be, where is it going to get placed, and when is it going to get sent? So rather than running through a couple of reports, kind of thing here is, okay, well, what are we going to report on? So there's a bunch of things that you may want to think about here. The alerts that we looked at, this might be something that somebody is interested in knowing about on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. So I take that query that I had already built, add it as a, we've already turned it into an alert. I add it as a report as well and set it up to happen on a particular schedule as well. So, the stuff that we already showed you, those are good candidates for reports. Anything that you alert on could be a candidate for a report. This is kind of the bigger one here, this third bullet point. What are the things that your auditors are asking you for on a regular basis? What reports are they asking you for quarterly or monthly? Things like, the common one I mentioned a couple of times, changes to the domain administrators group. Who was added and removed. That's a common request from the auditors, is show me those security groups, show me the changes that happened to them the last month or quarter. And you can automate that completely through here and have a report sent to them automatically, and you don't get that email from them anymore asking what was going on. So, anything your auditors are asking for, change to your quarterly options. This white paper, this link in here, one of our guys built a nice white paper, top 10 security reports that you might want to that you might want to run on. So there's some very good ones in here. Click on that link. We'll get it into the chat, or we'll make sure that you guys can get an easily clickable link on there for it. It is directly under the Change Audit. If you go into quest.com, click on Products, Change Auditor, White Papers. It's the first paper in the list as well. But this is a lot of security things, like, changes that happen to admin SD holder. What are the things that the hackers are doing? Somebody created a a golden ticket. So very good white paper. I think we have a couple other white papers out there as well. Anna, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to throw in like a good also idea for a report. If you want to understand the statistics of how users are, how many users are locking out in your environment, you can set up a report on your lockouts and then figure out your statistics on how bad the environment is and how many users forget their passwords or, something in that.
Yeah, that's a good one as well. I was actually just going to say, Anna and Gerald, you guys both came from customers. What were some of the things that you guys were being asked for to report on?
Yeah, the other, I guess, type of a report, our identity team in my previous life wanted to know if any other IT teams created user objects, because really that was not a appropriate function of the other teams. So we've created a report on if the accounts are not created by XYZ list of users or a group of users, then send a report on weekly basis to that manager so the manager can understand who and why they created these accounts.
Awesome. Gerald, do you have any that you would add?
Actually, I don't have any that I would add, but as you mentioned earlier, who's being added to domain admins group and who's being removed, because that's always been a big contention within large organizations as to who has access to what. So just knowing who's being added, who's being removed was always, big in the organizations that I've worked with.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. So, protection. The change order Active Directory license gives you the ability to do protection of objects within your Active Directory. And that includes things like the GPOs as well. So I can protect the Active Directory. I can actually protect the database file itself, and we'll show that one in there here because it's kind of interesting. You can also, if you're using an Atom ADFS interface for your logins to Azure AD, a lot of people have set up federation. So rather than authenticating off of the Azure AD, I want it to happen on-prem. You do that with an Atom ADFS instance. We can protect that as well. We can actually audit that as well as another AD database in here. So let's look at that. I'm not going to run through everything that you would protect. I am going to run through the example here. This is the one that just about everybody does, is I want to do a protection of my domain administrators and or my enterprise admins and or potentially some company specific groups that have a lot of power in here. So inside of the administration tasks, bottom left hand side, there is a protection option, and I can choose my Active Directory out of that. I'll right click or click on the toolbar and add a new one. And what I'm going to do in here is, obviously I'm going to take that template, I'm going to give it a name. I got to protect it. I got to give it a name somehow. So I'm going to have to find what I want. So I go into that search tab, I type domain admin, I find my domain admins group, and I add it down. When you are protecting objects within Active Directory, there are specific actions that you can protect against or not protect against. So you have the ability to take the domain admins group and move it between OUs. And that is this move option. If you're going to allow that, you could take this option off. Obviously the group already exists, so I'm not going to, create doesn't really do anything, but I'm going to block people from modifying. I'm going to block people from deleting an object. I'm going to block them from moving it. If I'm pointing my protection tablet or protection template at something like an organizational unit, I can define the scope. So the scope is going to be here. I'm looking at just this particular object. Okay, I'm protecting in this example a group, so I'm only protecting the one group. If I was pointing at, say, an OU, I could say, well, I'm protecting the OU, that's this object only, or maybe I'm protecting the OU and the direct child objects, that's object and children, or I can protect the entire tree of it. So I can really expand out my scope of what this protection template is doing. And then what are you going to protect? So this example, when I first built it out, it was all attributes. I want to protect absolutely everything in the domain admins group. Then I decided, let's put an exception in there as well. And I'm saying you can, in this here, I picked out of the attributes the description. And you see here we've selected everything. So I can protect everything or certain attributes. So in this case here, if I was checking this checkbox, only selected, the description field is the only field we would protect. By selecting the all except field here, we are protecting absolutely every field except for the description. Somebody who's a domain admin could go in, they could change the description of the domain admins group. That's all they can do. So, more likely you would say all on here. When I'm picking attributes, some attributes, when you hit that next button, some attributes are multi-valued. One of those, good example, is user access control. And you might only want to pick a piece of that field. So an example, and this again came from a customer, Anna, where we wanted to stop the help desk from being able to disable accounts in a specific OU. That is a field of the access control value. So you can pick, so if description was multi-valued, you pick it, it will show you all the values that you want to pick. Now that doesn't actually, description doesn't have anything. So what I need to do, I don't want to block everybody from making changes. So I want to allow somebody to be able to update that object. So in this case here, I'm going to say only the person that I have selected. Now here I've selected an individual person. This could be a group and everybody in that group would be able to do it as well. More likely you're going to have it be a specific person. Maybe you add your identity system service account here as well that can actually make the changes to this object. One company that I worked with, they created then a second protection template on the user who is allowed to make these changes as well. So we protect the domain admins group and only Brian can make changes to it. And then I create another template to protect Brian's account. So I'm stopping other hackers from getting in and changing his password or doing things to it so that, they can't hijack Brian's account and get in and do those things. So this is who can manage it. Or again, with the deny, I can do the exact opposite. This is the ones who cannot manage it. Now, separation of duties. Brian can go in here and make the changes to the group. Who can make changes to this template? So I picked a different user. If this is blank, anybody who is a change auditor admin can come in and modify this template. If I really want to lock this sucker down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a specific person that can manage the template. Anybody else goes in and tries to change this template, they will not be allowed to. So only this person. This person here, it's me actually. I can't change the domain admins group. If I try and do it, you're going to see the error in a second. But I can change the template. Say if Brian leaves the company, I can change Brian to Gerald and let Gerald be the guy who's managing our domain admins now. The AD templates have a couple of extra protection fields that the other templates don't. So one of them is time of day that this is in force. So you could do things that say, okay, I'm going to protect this every day except for Sunday. That's when we do maintenance. And I can unselect Sunday for enforcement in there. So, when are we applying it? This one, obviously, we're going to do it all the time. You can also protect based off of the location the change is coming from. This is one for things like, oh, my identity system runs on this specific IP address. I don't run this protection template there because of the identity system needs to be able to do its job. So I may not apply this template to happen in all the locations. So this is what happens when after you've assigned that. I'm a domain administrator. I found the domain admins group. I am trying to add Bill Nye to the group. And when I click on the OK button, it gives me this error here. So I should have rights to it, but in this case, change order is actually blocking me from it, and I'll get an error. And we'll also create an audit record as well in Change Auditor that somebody tried to do something they weren't, and it was blocked. So this is what the user is going to see with the protection templates. This is another AD template. I'm not going to run through the whole wizard, but we'll go in and show you just the correct pieces of it. There is a value for an OU called GP link. This is the GPOs. It's a multi-valued value. They're the GPOs that you've created that are actually connected to that particular point. So what we're doing in this one is I'm actually selecting the root of my domain in here, and I'm going to protect it. So when I hit on next, so we're calling it GPO linkage. We're picking in the root of the domain, and I am finding the GP link field. What this means is that nobody will be able to create or modify domain-wide GPOs. Somebody could create a new GPO. Like a hacker gets in, they create a GPO, they try and attach it to the domain to apply to everybody to do things like, turn off passwords or whatever it is. We're blocking them from doing that with this particular one by using the GP link, by protecting the GP link field. Now, the one thing you may want to do, and I don't know if I have this in my next slide, after I set the GP link, is who can actually do it. So I've added the GP link attribute. And then what you probably want to do is, if you're using a tool like our GPO admin tool, GPO admin is a proxy-based tool, runs through a service account. You would add your service account. If you're using GSMAs for the service account, the next build of change order is going to allow you to add the GSMA account here as well, so that through GPO admin, I can set up my people who should be able to modify the default domain policy and the default domain controllers policy. So I do need to allow those folks to be able to do it. So I'll add them in here as well. So that's who can actually do the applies. This is the last one I think we're going to go into here, is protecting the Active Directory database directly. So there's two things in here. So this is the protection. Under auditing, you will have the Active Directory database, and you can turn on auditing for the DIT file and see who is accessing the Active Directory DIT file directly. First thing you should do, for sure. Don't just turn this on. But when I get to the point where I'm ready to actually start protecting the Active Directory database, in my administration protection templates, I pick the Active Directory database. I'll click on Add to add a new template. It's very simple in how you do it. Give it a name. And then some processes are supposed to be able to actually access the DIT. You need to allow them. So this one here, Backup Agent 64, this is our Recovery Manager products agent that runs. Obviously, I want my backups against my Active Directory running, so I need to make sure that I exclude certain processes from being able to back it up. My backup software is one that definitely should still be able to access the DIT file. So that's really all we're doing, is turning it on and saying what should be able to access it, and hitting finish, and we're good. That will actually stop things like, if somebody tries to grab a hacker gets in, tries to grab a copy of your DIT file to do offline hacking, cracking the passwords, this will stop them from being able to do that. So that's the last template. But again, don't just turn this on. Go to the auditing section first, turn on auditing for the DIT file, and then see what's happening, make sure you know what's going on, what processes should access it, then you can come in and turn on the Active Directory, the protection of the DIT file directly as well. Okay, so that was the last slide. Here's the main links. Yeah,
Hey,
Gerald,
Ian,
go ahead.
I do have a question. Someone asked a question in regards to file shares. I know this was specifically on Active Directory, but in Azure Active Directory, but are there any resources that users can look at for file share monitoring to kind of limit how much space is taken up in a database?
Well, I don't know if we have any white papers or anything specific to that directly. A couple of suggestions, and I actually had this happen with another customer where they said they needed every particular attribute read and recorded. Reads. There's two levels of reads. And I think by default, we turn this on by default now. If you have Explorer with the either large, small icons or the preview pane turned on, browsing a file structure, it's actually doing a read of the files to show you those icons or the displays. That is definitely one to ensure that it's turned off. The act of a read, you may not want read that directly. You may only want the fails of read. Somebody tried to read a file, they couldn't. Those are definitely two that you want to really restrict. Reads themselves, that is the worst. It's going to create millions of rows and fill your database. You also want to be restrictive in where you're assigning these policies. Do not take a file policy and apply it to every server. Only apply it to your file servers when you're defining the configurations of it. And when you're connecting to it, don't tell it to go to all drives. I won't say no reason. There are very limited reasons why you want to audit the files on the operating system, other than it's going to create a ton of records for you that aren't that valuable. So, you definitely don't do all drives, just do the shares themselves. That's two ways to limit it, but we can kind of take that as an offline and see if we can figure out if there's other stuff as well. Does change auditor have the ability? Does change auditor have the ability to determine where AD groups are in use in a domain? If an AD group is used for a server for local admin or a file share? Yes and no. One of the things that is a part of the AD license is the ability to push the agent to member servers. And when you push it to member servers, you will start auditing the local AD users and groups. So if a user or a group gets added to a local group, we can audit that. At the file level, that's a different license. You need the file share. You need the change auditor for file servers, EMC, NetApp licenses to do that. And that will allow you to audit when people make changes to the permissions at a file folder or share level. Were there any other questions, Gerald and Anna, to go on?
No,
Nope,
I think
that was
everything
it.
else we answered. Yep.
Okay. One last thing. There's the SurveyMonkey survey here. It's going to get pasted in the chat in a second. Please fill that out for us to let us know, what went well, what are some other sessions you want for tips and tricks, and I will turn it back over to our host, Eric.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you for joining today's session, and thank you to our presenters, Ian, Anna, and Gerald.